Welcome everyone to this week's lesson where we're going to be discussing Tisha B'Av. This is the ninth day of the Hebrew month of Av, regarded by Jews as the saddest day of the Jewish calendar. Now, there's a list of catastrophes so severe that Jews see it as a day being so clearly set aside by God for suffering. So the origin of this dating of Tisha B'Av goes back all the way to when the spies returned with a bad report, of course. Having experienced the miracles in Egypt and at the Sea of Reeds, the Israelites began their journey in the wilderness with the promise of arriving to a fruitful land. Now, when 12 spies were sent to investigate the status of the land, they came back with a report full of pessimistic and almost blasphemous conclusions. They basically claimed that the land was unconquerable. This is how Numbers chapter 14 responds to this claim, and it says, "And all the congregation lifted up their voice and cried, and the people wept that night." So the rabbis teach that that night was specifically the ninth of Av. The people cried and they whined about wishing that they had stayed in Egypt. The Holy One, blessed be he, said, "You wept needlessly that night. And I will therefore establish for you a true tragedy over which there will be weeping in future generations." The people's punishment was for them to wander in the desert until they all perished, allowing only their children to have that privilege of entering the land only after more than 38 years later. So the Talmudic citation that dates this event on the ninth of Av further lists the following events also taking place on the same day in history, precisely because of the tears that were shed on this first ninth of Av. However, this time with these following events, the tears were warranted. So this is the major focus of the discussion, where the destruction of the temple is the tantamount cause for the ongoing mourning of this time period. The first temple was destroyed in 587, 586 before the Common Era, and the second temple in the year 70 of the Common Era. The temple, while it was standing, was the central place of worship for the Jewish people. It was the physical and spiritual heart of Jewish religious life, where daily sacrifices, prayers, and major religious festivals all took place. The temple was considered God's dwelling place on earth and as a symbol of the covenant between God and his chosen people. The Rambam teaches that the temple and its eternal significance had two primary reasons. Number one, it was to reveal to mankind the divine presence of God, dwelling above the seat of the Ark of the Covenant. And number two was to facilitate the sacrificial offerings. According to the Temple Institute, which is an organization aching to rebuild the temple, as I will mention in a future episode, according to the Temple Institute, 202 of the 613 commandments in the Torah cannot be performed without a temple. So this loss was huge. After the first temple was destroyed, Jews had to wait around a 70-year period in order for them to be able to rebuild. And after the second temple was destroyed, perhaps there was a chance at this scene of history repeating itself, right? Well, what if we fought the oppressors and rebuilt the temple? Well, long story short, all attempted rebellions failed, and it caused disastrous consequences for Jewry. Historically, the events of what is called the First Jewish War led to the Romans destroying the Second Temple in the year 70 of the Common Era, causing Jewish life under Roman rule to become even worse. And the Romans had erected a place of worship for Jupiter on Jerusalem's Temple Mount, where the Second Temple had stood. 60 years later, because of the many oppressive economic and political problems, a Jewish uprising against the Roman Empire reemerged. And around the year 130 of the Common Era, what is considered as the Third Roman Jewish War began to unravel. And again, just to put this into perspective, this is around a whole century after Jesus of Nazareth had lived and died. So in this sort of, imagine the Jewish life where 100 years, oh, actually, think of how almost 200 years ago we had the Maccabean revolt with Judah Maccabee who stood up and took over from Greek oppression. Okay, and then after that we had Jesus of Nazareth who, according to, let's say, a majority of the Jews that lived in that time, that pretty much did not ascribe any Messiah title to the man. Well, they saw him as a failed Messiah, somebody who was crucified. And of course, we know in Christian tradition died and resurrected, but in Jewish tradition, you know, that's just how, I guess, Judaism's history developed, where Jesus was seen as a failed Messiah. Why? Specifically because that tradition of the Messiah is ascribed or is identified as a liberator from Roman oppression, and that didn't happen. So now more than ever, 100 years after Jesus' death, and now we're at maybe this is 50 to 60 years after the destruction of the temple, well, Jews were awaiting the heralding of the Messianic age. So this event is also titled the Bar Kokhba Revolt, and this is named after a Jewish military leader in Judea. So the image on this slide, actually, I wanted to show some of the coins minted during this period with Paleo-Hebrew writings that had messages or inscriptions such as for the freedom of Jerusalem or for the redemption of Israel. The imagery included, as you see here, the temple, a star, a lyre, a lulav, which is a palm branch, and an etrog, a citron, which are most notable during the Sukkot festivities, the Feast of Tabernacles. According to the Talmud, Shimon Bar Kokhba said himself to be the long-awaited Messiah, and many among the people believed him. So finally, remember, they were waiting for somebody to rise up to be the expected messianic figure who was in Jewish tradition at this point. They were expecting a ferocious warrior who would lead the nation overthrowing the Roman Empire. And his name was Shimon Bar Kokhba, but is referred to as Bar Kokhba, which means the son of the star. Taken traditionally, this is taken from Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was said to associate him with the messianic text in the book of Numbers, chapter 24, where it says, "A star set out from Jacob." And traditionally, Akiva was a prominent supporter and believed that this was indeed the Messiah. Long story short, the final battle was in Betar, which was in the year 135 of the Common Era, where the Jewish militant fortress was breached and destroyed. And according to Rabbinic Midrash, the Romans executed 8 leading members of the Sanhedrin, one of them being Rabbi Akiva. So this was seen as the final mark of this long Roman-Jewish war. The fall of Betar had irreversible consequences for Jewish life. There was a profound loss of life, extensive forced displacements, and widespread enslavement, and some scholars consider the scale of suffering as an act of genocide. Jews were expelled from the land, they were colonized, they were resettled. Jewish life was religiously and culturally suppressed. There were bans on Torah law and the Hebrew calendar, and further executions of Judaic scholars. So this wasn't exactly new, but this just basically was enhanced after these failed attempts. This also caused a sharp decline of the Hebrew language. So Hebrew language, it was no longer used daily, but now it was reserved specifically for literary usage. The final battle of Betar occurred on the 9th of Av. Now, according to more recent or contemporary Jewish sources, there are several other tragedies that befell on the 9th of Av, including the expulsion of Jews from England in the year 1290, the banishment of Jews from Spain in 1492, as well as the events of World War I, which historians would consider to be the very reason there was a Second World War and basically leading up to the Holocaust. Well, it all started on the 9th of Av. On the 9th of Av, Jews limit their Torah study to the few allowed topics that are of sad nature or related to the temple's destruction. While this day is regarded as the saddest day of the Jewish year, a day of mourning and repentance, one shouldn't see this time period as a commandment to all Jews that you have to be sad for 21 days or you have to enter into a depressive state for no reason. Rather, it's supposed to be that in the midst of the mourning, there is an element of joy and comfort. Because this time period calls for an intense mourning in order to truly capture the feeling once sorrow turns into joy. In the Messianic era, these fast days will turn into feasts. The mourning on Tisha B'Av is of something that is missing, not something that's declared dead. When a person is missing, the search for that person is incessant. There has to be some type of closure in order for one to move on. This is the idea of Tisha B'Av. It's a reminder not of something that has been destroyed to the point of forgetfulness or no hope in rebuilding. No. Tisha B'Av is a reminder of what has been lost, implying it can be found. So the book of Lamentations is actually an example of a time amidst the destruction, awaiting for that divine response. The evening prayers are followed by the chanting of Echa. This is the book of Lamentations. This is traditionally ascribed to the prophet Jeremiah, who had witnessed the fall of Jerusalem and the destruction of the first temple firsthand. The book of Lamentations is an example of a time amidst the destruction, awaiting a response. Remember, awaiting for that divine calling, but even at the end of the book, no divine response is given. There is no "and the Lord said" throughout the book. So, despite no sign of a response, the author still concludes his pleas with the following: You, Adonai, are enthroned forever. Your throne endures from generation to generation. Why do you always forget us and forsake us for so long? Bring us back to you, Adonai, and we will return. Renew our days as of old, unless you have utterly rejected us and are exceedingly angry with us. So, for Jews, living without the temple means living in exile. It's a separation from the physical and the spiritual. That is why Jews wait and pray every single day for the temple to be reconstructed and for immediate redemption. The restoration that Jews await involves the rebuilding of the temple, which will be the third temple. The third temple is considered indestructible. It is of vital and spiritual importance given its involvement in the Messianic era. The construction of the third temple is seen as the key element of the ingathering of the exiles. The major interpretation being that the temple must be built first for all the Jewish people to return to their land. So interpretations do vary, but it seems the Orthodox view emphasizes this necessity of the exiles being gathered in. Stay tuned for the next lesson, where we're going to review how denominations within both Judaism and Christianity approach the discussion of a third temple. Will it be built? When will it be built? What will its purpose be? Well, we'll answer that and more in the next lesson. Until then, shalom, shalom, and shavua tov. Have a great week, everyone.